The Shadow Guests by Joan Aiken, 2 elder brothers. A slapping, gusty rain was falling on Monday as Cousin Eunice drove Cosmo into Oxford. He was wearing, for the first time, the Morning Quest school uniform, which had been ordered beforehand for him. His father had sent the measurements from Australia. The uniform was severe: black raincoat and blazer, white shirt, gray trousers, and gray, black, and white striped tie. "You look like a stockbroker," Cousin Eunice said. But she herself looked unexpectedly businesslike and formidable, too, in a tailored suit and stockings, and her yellow hair done up very tight instead of the jeans, sweater, and loose plait she had worn over the weekend. In the back of the car, she had chucked a voluminous black gown to be worn when she gave her lecture. She said, "It frightens the students and makes them pay attention because I look like Dracula's aunt." What was the lecture about? Cosmo wanted to know. "It's about solving equations in the 5th degree, which are supposed to be insoluble." They are? They are? Why? Lots of things are still insoluble," Cousin Eunice said. "Even though solutions may exist, we can't get at them or explain happenings, even though we can see them happening. I was reading the other day about a boy who makes sculptures out of paper clips without touching them. He can do it even if the paper clips are sealed up inside a glass globe." "How?" "It isn't known how, but he does it, and not by magic. Or rather, it's what would have been called magic 200 years ago. He'd probably have been burned as a witch. Now, we know it's something to do with radiation, with vibrations. People have moved bits of metal through walls in some way, without making a hole in the wall, without bending the metal. What it amounts to is that we have got a wrong idea about matter. Some things can be in 2 places at once." Cosmo felt as if he was losing his grasp, but he hung on grimly. "Perhaps it's our idea of time that's wrong?" This is him talking. "Perhaps it's our idea of time that's wrong? At once. When you say 2 places at once, maybe that's not what we think. When I was coming here from Australia, time kept sliding about. A plane got to some places before it had started, and if we were on a distant star looking at the Earth, we'd still be seeing things that happened long ago." "Yes, something like that." A great slap of rain poured over the windscreen, and she doubled the speed of the wipers. "I do hope you have a good science teacher at the Morning Quest. Dick Soames said he thinks the man isn't too bad. He's called Mr. Ramsden." I wish I didn't have to go to school," said Cosmo. "I'm sure school was invented just because parents can't be bothered to look after their children." Cousin Eunice considered this. "Very possibly, but there are some advantages to it. After all, especially nowadays, you do have to learn a lot of things just to keep alive. Look how useless babies are. They don't know how to prise the lids off treacle tins. They wouldn't last a day without help. What schools ought to be, I don't say they are, is places where you can pick up all that kind of know-how very quickly and compactly, and, of course, make friends. Learn how to get on with other people." Cosmo felt he could have done without that part. Cousin Eunice said, I haven't talked to you about your mother and Mark." He had been grateful for this. "I thought you'd probably rather not just yet," she went on. "But if you want to at any time, sometimes it does help to talk." Just at that moment, he could not have talked. His throat was stuck. He could not even nod. Seeing this, she went on, changing the subject. "Now you must be sure and let me know if there's anything at school that you need and haven't got. I went all through that fearsome printed list, but lists don't always cover everything. Mrs. Robinson, she's the matron, said it would be all right for me to phone you in the evening this evening at about 5, and then if you find you need a briefcase or a magnet or something I haven't thought of, I could get it for you and drop it at the school." "But I thought you didn't come into Oxford again till Friday." "Oh," she said, "sometimes I come in and go shopping. Old Lob likes a shopping trip now and then. He enjoys the town smells, and so does Emma." Lob had elected to stay at home today after one look at the weather, settling down with a sigh on the big hearthstone that still held the warmth of yesterday's blazing fire. It had been a good weekend on the whole. Cosmo had discovered on Saturday that he did not, after all, want to dam the brook again. Or not just yet. It made him remember Mark too vividly. Instead, he climbed up through the wood and made friends with Mr. Marvel and Prince and Blossom, who were pulling a plow through black, sticky chocolate cake earth, and then with Duke and Duchess, who were drawing a tumbrel with mangolds for the sheep. He had been allowed to ride on Duchess's broad back, and then he had explored the island, which was all grown over with elder bushes and was going to be very netly soon. It would make a grand place for a fort. On Sunday, he helped Cousin Eunice prune trees in the orchard and clip a yew hedge with very efficient electric clippers. In the afternoon it had rained, but then there was the great fire in the stone hearth, and all Father's books. His own were following by boat. "When you start making friends at school, you can bring people back for the weekends," Cousin Eunice said. "There are lots of bedrooms." "Oh, I don't suppose I'll want to do that." "Here we are," she said. They had been driving down the Woodstock Road for what seemed an endless time. It was a wide road, with large middle-aged houses on each side, set back behind low walls and shiny laurel evergreen trees. Some of the gardens had crocuses in them, and a few daffodils. Now the rolls drew to a stately halt in the semicircular drive of a particularly large high house, with a front decorated by pinnacles and stone balconies. There were 2 huge stone balls ornamenting the balustrade on each side of the 3 front steps. "The rolls ought to get you off to a good start anyway," Cousin Eunice said. An old man, Goodger, the odd-job man, Cosmo later learned, came and took his luggage out of the boot, giving the cars a respectful and affectionate look as he did so. Boys and girls of varying ages were pouring in through the front and side gates. The boys wore the same uniform as Cosmo. The girls, under their black raincoats, had gray skirts and long black socks. A gray-haired woman, Mrs. Robinson, the matron, hissed Cousin Eunice, was in the front hall to meet them. She had kind dark eyes and skin like uncooked pastry, pale and a little soggy. She wore a twin set and a houndstooth check skirt. "So this is Cosmo," she said in a gentle Scottish voice. "Well, and we're very glad to have you with us, Cosmo, even so late in the term. Now, I'm sure you have lots of things to do, Professor Doom, so I'll not be keeping you." "That means she wants to get rid of me," said Cousin Eunice to Cosmo. "So I'll say goodbye for now and see you on Friday about 4 o'clock, and I'll phone you this evening at 5. She ran down the front steps with a quick flip of her hand. "A very distinguished lady, Professor Doom," Mrs. Robinson said. "That's right, Goodger. Take Cosmo's cases up to the Ruskin dormitory. You are lucky to have an aunt like that, I dare say. She'll be no end of help to you with your maths and science. Now, I'll just show you where your bedroom is, and then it will be time for prayers. And after that, I know Mr. Gabbitas wants a word with you. He's the headmaster, as you probably know." Cosmo followed Mrs. Robinson, deciding not to correct the mistake about Eunice being his aunt. What did it matter anyway? The stairs were covered with tremendously thick, durable coconut matting, and there were old-school photographs with dates all the way up the wall, above a strong smell of lino and furniture polish. The doors opening into classrooms, then up again more stairs to a higher landing where there were dormitories containing, he was glad to see, only 4 or 5 beds each. He had imagined long rows like hospital wards. "Here is yours, Ruskin, and this is your bed in the corner," Mrs. Robinson said. Goodger had already left his cases. There was a chest of drawers, a chair, and a washstand. "You can unpack tonight. There won't be time now. I'll take you down to your form room. You are in remove." "What is remove?" "That's the name of the form you are in," Mrs. Robinson said patiently. "There are juniors at the bottom of the school, then second and third preparatories, then remove, that's you, then first and second intermediate, then first, second and third shell, and then the seniors. So you are about in the middle." "What queer names!" "Shell comes from the French échelle. That means ladder." "Now here's your form room." They went down on the floor below again. Mrs. Robinson opened a door to display a room full of bushy-occupied gray and white figures who were getting books out of lockers and putting them on tables. "Charlie," she called, "this is Cosmo Curtis. Will you please show him where he's to sit and take him over to prayers? And why is your tie such a mess, may I ask?" She untied, retied, and tightened the offending tie in 3 swift movements. Charlie, a boy who was freckled all over like a bird's egg, submitted with a resigned grin. "Right then, Cosmo, I'll be seeing you later." Mrs. Robinson vanished as the bell began to ring. "That's for prayers," said Charlie. "Come on." Everybody in the room, there seemed about a dozen, in fact. There were 10, as Cosmo later discovered, clattered down the stairs, out through a side door, down some iron steps, and along a covered way to the school hall, which was a large wooden building with a stage at one end. Cosmo noticed on the way a wintry-looking garden, a hard tennis court, which was at present one huge puddle with yellow leaves floating in it, a swing, a seesaw, a stretch of soggy lawn, some gravel paths. It all looked dismal. In the school hall stood in rows. In the school hall, they stood in rows, a row to a form. Cosmo, squinting sideways, found that there were 4 girls and 6 boys in his row, not counting himself. Several people turned and stared at him. From rows in front, he felt very conspicuous in his new tidy uniform. 2 people, a man and a woman, came briskly onto the platform. A hymn was sung, "He Who Would Valiant Be," one that Cosmo knew, which was a relief, and prayers were said, and they all dispersed again. The members of Remove went back to their classroom, where they found a red-nosed, sandy-haired man waiting for them. "Ah, we have a new member today, Cosmo Curtis," he said. "You had better sit there, Cosmo." There were 3 tables in the room, with 4 chairs at each. The man indicated an empty place, and Cosmo went to it and sat down. He was beside a girl with plates, who gave him a cool look. "Actually, you pronounce my name Curtis," he said to the sandy man. "I beg your pardon?" "My name is pronounced Curtis." A titter ran around the room. Cosmo flushed. "You should always put up your hand before speaking to a member of the staff," the sandy man told him. "Right, Curtis it shall be. I hope you have all imbibed that piece of information," he said to the rest of the form. "Cosmo has just come from Australia. I dare say he will be able to tell us about marsupials and billabongs when it comes to geography. At present, however, we have to address ourselves to the decimal system." Cosmo had done the decimal system and found it no problem, but after about 10 minutes a head poked round the door and said, "Cosmo Curtois to the headmaster's office." "He prefers his name to be pronounced Curtis," said the sandy-haired man. Everybody laughed openly this time. Cosmo stood up with hot cheeks. What was so funny about his name, for heaven's sake? He followed the head, it belonged to one of the boys from the senior form, along a highly polished passage to a half-open door. "Here's Cosmo Curtois, sir." He made no attempt to pronounce the name correctly, feeling that Cosmo was too young for such a privilege. "Ah, yes. Come in and shut the door." Mr. Gabatas, the headmaster, was the white-haired man who had read the prayers. He had a face, Cosmo thought, like a saluki, long and rather sweet. He should have had long, drooping, silky ears on either side to complete the effect. "Sit down, my dear Curtis." He got the name right. "I won't keep you a minute, because I expect you will be wanting to get to know your form mates." Cosmo did not argue about this, but sat down as directed. The headmaster's room was small and snug, with 3 very interesting pictures on the walls. He would have liked to take a good look at them, but Mr. Gabatas was saying, "Now, all this will seem quite strange to you for a while. I expect your cousin tells me that you were living right out in the wilds and having lessons sent by post. Is that right? Seeing such a lot of unfamiliar faces will be rather tiring for you at first, but I expect you will soon settle down. This is not really such a big school. I hope you will find us all a very friendly sort of people." He paused and smiled, and Cosmo felt He was expected to say something, but could not think of anything suitable. "Now," went on Mr. Gavatas, "I have decided, and I have talked this over with the other members of staff here, and we have decided that on the whole it will be more sensible if we don't tell the other boys and girls in the school about your sad loss." Loss, thought Cosmo. Stolidly, he picked the right word there. "You have been through a very unhappy time," Mr. Gavatas continued, "and we think it will be best for you if it is not talked about and discussed and made into a mystery, which can so easily happen, can't it?" "Yes, sir." "So, all that has been said about you, Cosmo, is that your relatives are in Australia, and you have come over here by yourself to go to school, and you are staying with your very distinguished cousin. And if you agree, we'll keep it that way." "Yes, sir." "You are quite happy about this, eh? You agree that it's best to put painful things behind you, just try to take part in the ordinary life of the school, where I am sure you will soon find friends?" "Yes, sir." "However," Mr. Gavatas went on, "I don't know if your cousin has told you that, as well as being a headmaster, I am a psychiatrist. That is, a kind of mind doctor. If you find at any time, Cosmo, that you feel unhappy or worried or puzzled, that you aren't managing to settle down, you can always come and see me, and I'll try and help you. Just tell your form master, Mr. Cheevy or Mrs. Robinson, and they will fix a time for you to come, all right? Now you had better run along, as we are both going to be very busy." He gave Cosmo a sweet, rather too sweet, smile, creasing up his eyes to show that the interview was over, and Cosmo found his way back to the form room. Well, anyway, he thought, now I know that the sandy-haired man is called Mr. Cheevy. During the day, he got the rest of his forms sorted out. The 4 girls were Rebecca, Sheil, Tansy, and Meredith. Rebecca was German, large, fair-haired, and cheerfully good at everything she did. Sheil was small and silent, with a slight cast in one eye. Tansy had bright brown ringlets and giggled a lot. Meredith was the dark girl with plaits, who had given him the cool, measuring look when he first sat down. The boys were not so easy to sort out because there were more of them. Cosmo could see at once that the freckled Charlie was the form leader. He was so, not because he was brighter than the rest, but because he was so tremendously active and confident. And his friend, Molesworth, whom everyone called Molly, was therefore the second in command, not because of any commanding qualities, but because he was Charlie's friend. Molly actually seemed quite decent. He was rather quiet and pale, with an unimpressive face, but he had a habit of making short, dry, funny remarks. Often these were in such a low voice that only the people sitting at his own table caught them, but Cosmo heard one, as Mr. Cheevy gathered up his books and left the room. When the bell went at the end of the period, Cosmo noticed that the master's hands shook quite badly. A couple of papers slipped from his grasp, and the obliging Rebecca helped to pick them up and hand them back. "He won't win the egg and spoon race," muttered Molly deadpan. Cosmo was surprised into laughing, and several people looked at him with raised eyebrows. Evidently newcomers were not supposed to laugh at jokes. It was easy to pick out the form fool. That was the boy called Tom Bunthorne, whom everybody, including the staff, addressed as Bun. He was a big, heavy boy, clumsy in his movements, and always in a muddle. He was never able to answer a single question correctly, and the remarks he made were so stupid that everybody sighed when he opened his mouth. But he never gave up trying. He had a big, hopeful smile that showed a lot of unbrushed teeth. His skin was dry and flaky, and he smelled rather badly, too. It was a sweetish, musty smell, not unlike that of Lob, thought Cosmo, who was sitting between him and Meredith. Evidently, before Cosmo's arrival, Bun had been stuck by himself at the end of a table. But there were a couple of boys who were friends and talked almost exclusively. Then there were a couple of boys who were friends and talked almost exclusively to each other. Andy and Lot, they were called. Cosmo discovered later they were day boys and disappeared at lunchtime, going off to Lot's house, where they both had lunch. Cosmo began to see what Cousin Eunice had meant about day boys being left out of things. Lunch was something of a trial. The dining room was huge, with 10 tables that each held 20 people. Everybody raced in when the gong went, and friends kept places for each other, sometimes bagging whole sides of tables for groups or gangs. "You want to sit by me?" Bun offered with a hopeful smile. "All right," Cosmo said resignedly. There was only one place left, so he had to, but he could already see that to be Bun's friend was to share his isolation. It was like touching a leper and catching his disease. Probably Bun tried to make friends with every new boy who came, and as soon as they found anybody better, they dropped him. His rough-skinned face, with its pale eyes and ever-open mouth, seemed to hold already the expectation of this disappointment. Mrs. Robinson, on Cosmo's other side, was at the end of the table, serving out slices of cold meat. "Cosmo's from Australia," she told the table at large. "He'll be able to tell us all about the bush. Have you seen lots of kangaroos, Cosmo?" Cosmo felt himself redden as everybody looked at him. It seemed too dull to confess that he lived in a part of Australia where there were no kangaroos. He said, "Well, I did see one once when my mother and I were crossing the desert in a Land Rover. We stopped at night to sleep and I woke up and went for a walk. It was moonlight and I saw what I thought was a funny-shaped tree stump, so I walked toward it, then it got up and hopped away." Quite a few people laughed, but he noticed disbelieving expressions on the faces of Charlie and Molly, who were sitting at the top of the table, and of course they were right. The episode was a true one, but it had happened to his brother Mark, not to him. He had been too small for that trip, but Mark had told him about it. He was thankful when most people at the table began talking about some football match and forgot him, except Bun, that is, who plied him with boring questions about Australia until the end of the meal. In the afternoon, people were supposed to play football or hockey, but as the rain was still pelting down, there were indoor sports in the school hall taken by Mr. Bredberry, the games master, an irascible little man with dark red spots on each cheekbone, who was frighteningly quick at giving orders in a shrill shout. "Now we'll play do this, do that. Do this!" He stood on one leg. "Do that!" He bent down and put his head between his legs. "Do this!" He sunk down like a frog. "You, new boy, you're out." Cosmo, who had never heard of the game, gathered confusedly that you were supposed to obey one set of orders but not the other. Everybody looked at him despairingly. Or despisingly. Then they played hideous games with bags of beans, tossing them from hand to hand at top speed, one team trying to race the other. Cosmo was hopeless at those too, but a lot of the other boys were equally bad. Only the girls shone here, whipping the bags nimbly from one to the next. Then they played an even worse game, where one team stood in a circle made by the other team and had a football hurled at their legs. You were supposed to jump in the air to avoid the ball. When it hit you, you were out. Here, Charlie, bouncing agile, and seemingly tireless, stayed in longer than anybody except the German Rebecca. Charlie's friend Molly did not take part in these games. He had a weak heart, somebody said. He sat cross-legged against the wall, shouting encouragement to his friend. Cosmo was immensely relieved when this period was over, and they went on to a physics lesson with the red-headed Mr. Ramsden. It was good to be in a real lab with benches and retorts and Bunsen burners, things that Mark and he had always longed for as they tried to do experiments out of the boys' book of practical science. Then there was tea, bread and jam, and strong tea like tea water. Instead of the staff as at lunch, members of the senior form sat at the heads of tables and poured the tea. Bun again hopefully kept a place for Cosmo, and Cosmo again resignedly sat in it. Then there were 2 hours of homework done in science. During this period, Eunice phoned. No, Cosmo told her he was fine. He needed nothing. Yes, school was okay. No, truly, he didn't want anything, which was true, except perhaps to fall down a black well forever. "See you on Friday, then," she said and hung up. Then there was supper, sardines on toast, and stewed apple. By now, the day seemed to have been going on for about 6 months. As they left the dining room, he happened to be beside Meredith, and he asked her, "What do we do now?" "Whatever you like," she said coolly. "You are free till bedtime. which is 8:30 for our lot. What are you going to do? Piano practice, she said, and took a music case from a rack and walked away. Cosmo went back to his form room. Charlie, Molly, Rebecca, Shield, Tansy, and another boy were in there. Instantly on entering the room, Cosmo had the uncomfortable feeling they had been talking about him. He went to his locker and pretended to hunt among the books that had been given to him. Who do you hate the worst in school, Rebecca? Said Tansy, breaking the silence with her giggle. Miss Mossop, ugh, she's like a rotten potato. Chris? Bun, I wish he'd catch housemaid's knee and athlete's foot and tennis elbow and die. They all laughed. Charlie, who do you hate worst? Charlie pondered. Old Gabby Gabatos, he said at last, because of his do-gooding. Molly? Oh, I don't know. Yes, I do. It's a picture of our sainted founder, dear old Canon Morningquist, over the middle dining table. He makes me want to regurgitate. They laughed again. Cosmo pretended that he had found what he had came for, retreated. He could hear a buzz of talk break out as soon as he closed the door. Wandering without purpose, he remembered that in the basement next to the lab, they had done their physics. Another door had a sign that said playroom. He made his way to it, along a damp basement passage that smelled of laundry and shoe polish. There were voices coming from inside this door also, and he opened it with weary apprehension as one might approach cannibals dancing around a boiling pot. But inside the room, which was large and cold and contained a ping-pong table and a Corinthian bagatelle board, there were only two people. He recognized them as members of the form below remove, who had joined in the sports that afternoon, a boy and a girl called Francis and Tim. They had pushed the ping-pong table against the wall and were sliding on the polished lino, trying to achieve one complete turn as they slid the length of the room. Cosmo watched them for a while. Do you want to play ping-pong? Asked the girl Francis, who looked quite good-natured. No, thanks, he said quickly. Then he wished he had said yes. Yes, Mark and he had played a lot. And Ma sometimes joined in. She was formidably good. He wandered aimlessly back upstairs and found with relief that it was nearly 8:30 and he could go to bed. The other three boys with whom he shared Ruskin dormitory were all from different forms and older. They went to bed later. He was able to get undressed and into bed before they appeared. But he could not sleep. His heart felt as heavy as if a magnet were dragging it down. However, he pretended to be asleep when the elders came up, so as not to have to talk to them. One of them said, He comes from Australia, doesn't he? Evidently with a nod toward Cosmo. Was telling some story about bumping into a kangaroo in the dark. Didn't sound true. Wonder why he comes now in the middle of term, somebody yawned. I bags the first bath. Don't be too long then, you stinker. At last the lights were out, and at last, clutching under his pillow the diary in which he had written, First day at school, vile place, Cosmo went to sleep. As soon as he slept, he began to dream about the brook at Curtis Mills. He and Mark were wading up, searching and calling for the boy called Len or Ken, and the water was coming in over the tops of those boots. And we'll pause there.